Hey, everyone, and welcome back. This is Australian Detective, and in this video, we're delving into a true crime story from Australia. I've covered my fair share of cases from down under, but this one is as far from sunny as it gets. It takes us to Queensland, the Sunshine Coast, and this story is anything but sunshine. Many years later, it revolves around a disappearance and an absolutely insane undercover operation to find a resolution. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more true crime stories. But hey, who am I to tell you what to do? So, in my previous videos, I've covered some pretty intense cases, but this one truly takes the cake. By cake, I mean the entire bakery. So, let's dive into it. If you were to fly into this part of Australia, you might land at Brisbane Airport. Getting to where we need to go will take you about an hour and a half north to the Sunshine Coast. It's full of resorts, beautiful nature, beaches, and rainforests. And if that doesn't get your heart racing, it's Australia's craft beer capital. Sounds pretty good, right? It's better than a kick in the rear, that's for sure. The Sunshine Coast ranks low in crime but high in being absolutely rad. The only problem you'd have living there is that everyone else wants to visit. So it gets pretty busy in the summer, but other than that, the fine folks here live a laid-back life of beers, barbecues, and bikinis, if you can believe that. And that's where Daniel Morcombe and his family lived. Daniel was born in December 1989 to parents Bruce and Denise. He had two brothers, with Dean being the older one. Daniel's twin, in fact. The Morcombes settled in Palmwoods, in the bucolic hinterland, on a small rural property. Daniel attended the nearby Catholic school in Sippy Downs, along with his brothers. Growing up, he was mad about motocross and his pets, especially a pony to make a little skadoosh on the side. Daniel and his brothers also picked passion fruit on a neighbor's farm. The Paxton family were their neighbors, and 13-year-old Daniel, in early December 2003, was thought of as an ordinary kid, quiet, reserved, but a nice guy who didn't cause trouble and got along with everyone. He was a much-loved member of the Morcombes. Now, let's dive into the events of Sunday, the 7th of December 2003. It was the middle of summer in Australia, a hot time of the year on the Sunshine Coast. December is wet in Queensland, with 2/3 of the month seeing rain. On this day, summer holidays were fast approaching. Daniel himself would be turning 14 in 2 weeks' time. That Sunday morning, Daniel and his brothers were picking passion fruit on the Paxton's farm, not too far away from their home. They were due to start picking at 6:30 a.m., but the rain kept them until 7:30. This had a knock-on effect because their parents, Bruce and Denise, were going to a work Christmas event in Brisbane, and the kids were supposed to join them. However, due to the delayed picking, they couldn't make it. So, the lads picked away, and Dean, the older brother, finished before his younger twin brothers, Daniel and Brad. Daniel and Brad arrived home at 9:45 a.m. and were paid a kingly sum of $90 Australian for their efforts. So, the boys were home alone, but no worries, right? The youngest, Daniel and Brad, who were 13 years old, would be fine. So, fine, in fact, that Daniel left his house at 1 p.m. to catch a bus to the nearby shopping mall to buy some Christmas presents. He walked to the Nambour Connection Road, where there was an overpass. Underneath was where Daniel would catch the bus. It wasn't an official bus stop, but the drivers usually stopped there. However, this day was different. The regular bus had broken down, and the replacement bus was behind schedule. It didn't stop at that unofficial bus stop, although the driver did see Daniel with an older man while driving by. The driver radioed for the next bus to pick him up, which arrived only a few minutes later. However, when it pulled up, there was no one under the bridge. This situation was declared a major incident, and searches for Daniel began. Word spread, and any reported sightings were followed up on. The investigation involved door knocks, water searches, and examination of leftover forensics. A week later, a mannequin was placed where Daniel was last seen, and all drivers were questioned. Over 100 police officers were involved in the search within 3 days, and over 10,000 people were interviewed as time went by. Now, let's fast forward. It's been 5.5 years since Daniel Morcombe disappeared. 1 year after his disappearance, a memorial was held, attended by 1,000 people. In 2005, the Daniel Morcombe Foundation was launched, offering a $1 million reward for new information related to the disappearance. But the police were no closer to finding him. Suspects were considered, and one of them was a guy named Cowan, who claimed to have been driving on that road on the day Daniel disappeared. He said he had been there to get some illicit substances but insisted he had nothing to do with Daniel's disappearance. Then there was a guy named Jackway, a convicted offender who had only been out of prison for a month before Daniel vanished. A vehicle similar to his was seen in the area, but there was no concrete evidence to pin anything on either of these suspects. In 2011, Bruce and Denise Morcombe called for an inquest into their son's disappearance, hoping to get answers. The inquest led to witnesses giving evidence, and one of them was a convicted pedophile known as P7, who was rumored to have been in the area on the day Daniel disappeared. After his testimony, he flew back to Perth, where he lived at the time. P7, whose real name is Cowan, had an extensive criminal history and a propensity for child molestation. However, he denied having seen or spoken to Daniel on the day of his disappearance. But Brett was not your average criminal, he had become part of an undercover operation conducted by the police. And this is where things take a surprising turn. Brett Cowan, also known as P7, had been part of an undercover operation led by the police for about 5 months. He was arrested after he revealed information about Daniel Morcombe's disappearance while working as an informant for the police. This operation was similar to what is known as a Mr. Big operation, where the police set up a fake gang, and the target, in this case, Brett Cowan, believed he was a member of this criminal organization. In a taped conversation, Brett Cowan spoke with another man named Joe Emery, whom he had just met on a flight. Joe needed to buy a car and was new to Perth, so he asked Brett for help. Brett was part of a gang led by a man named Fitzsy and had been making good money through illegal activities. This gang had corrupt police officers involved, and when they heard that Brett might provide evidence about Daniel Morcombe's disappearance, they needed to ensure that there were no loose ends. So, in the conversation with Joe Emery, they pressured Brett to tell them what he knew about Daniel's disappearance. They wanted to ensure that he wouldn't provide any information that could lead to an investigation of their gang. Brett eventually opened up and confessed to his involvement in Daniel's disappearance. He stated that he had picked Daniel up under the pretense of giving him a lift to the shopping center but drove him to an abandoned building in the bush, where he panicked and strangled the teenager. However, the evidence did not support his claim. In a prior conversation with Fitzsy, Brett had mentioned that he had some man fun with Daniel and later said there were no witnesses, which contradicted his confession. Subsequently, Brett led undercover police officers to the location where he claimed to have disposed of Daniel's remains. After a thorough search, Daniel Morcombe's remains were finally found. Brett Cowan went on trial in February 2014, pleading not guilty to the charges. However, 1 month later, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 20 years. And so, we come to the end of this harrowing true crime story, the disappearance of Daniel Morcombe. It's a tragic and disturbing tale, but justice was eventually served thanks to the determination of the Morcombe family and the efforts of law enforcement. Thank you for watching this video. Your support means a lot to me. Please subscribe if you want to see more true crime stories. But that's it, I won't tell you what to do. You're your own person. Take care of each other and, most importantly, yourselves, because I appreciate you.